All right, hey guys, Ridgeway here. So we're going to be dealing with our next lesson here, which is looking at kind of how we actually wrap up the combat then portions of World War II. So let's dive right into it. So we are going to be focusing on the Pacific Theater today, but just as a quick reminder, because again, I'm trying to kind of prep you guys for a final that is coming here. I want you to just do a quick kind of recall. So the causes of World War I and the causes of World War II. I'd like you to be a little bit creative. Make a couple of haiku poems. One on the causes of, again, World War I, one on World War II, and just remember a haiku is a poem of 5, 7, and then 5 syllables. Okay? Once you do that, so what we're going to be looking at here and really just focusing on today is going to be then the decisions made behind why the U.S. does what it does. From kind of 1941 to 1945. We'll talk a little bit about Midway and a couple of the other battles, but we're really going to be kind of staying at the 80,000 kind of foot level. The other thing that we're going to be looking at here is then the decision by the United States to drop the 2 atomic bombs, one on Hiroshima and the other on Nagasaki. Okay? So with that, let's get into this to the Pacific Theater. Okay? Again, kind of we're looking more here from a strategy perspective and kind of trying to understand the big picture for why the U.S. is making certain decisions that they are in World War II. Again, just a quick reminder that the idea for the United States is that you are going to be playing on the defensive against Japan in World War II, at least for, I would say, the first 2 years, 1942, 1943, and then kind of mostly focusing on Germany. That isn't to say that there isn't stuff happening during those years. It's just not the United States' main focus in terms of where they are really going to be, spending, I'll say, roughly 60% of their time is going to be focused more on Europe. With that in mind, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take off the crop that I have here. Just because as I am looking at this, I want to make sure that you guys can see everything. So give me just a moment to do that. Take a look at the filters. There we go. So let's go there. That looks so much better. And then we can just go ahead and do 0 for that one as well. Perfect. So with that in mind, let's talk about then kind of like what the U.S. is going to be up to strategically. Okay, so again, the Atlantic Charter, right? That's kind of what we just covered there. Is that the United States is going to be focusing on Germany first, while kind of then getting up to speed with Japan. The question though is, so again, obviously this theater is going to be dominated by water. It's the Pacific Ocean, right? Is should the U.S. then invade every single island that Japan has occupied since the attack on Pearl Harbor? And the decision is made basically that no, and it's made that way for a couple reasons. One is that just the sheer amount of men that would take would be dramatically higher, right? And then that also means then the casualties that you're going to take are going to be higher. And then the second thing that kind of factors into that too is then time, right? Like a lot of the islands that Japan has occupied, some of them don't necessarily have the largest strategic value, but every single island that you decide to invade is going to be also costly in terms of just the amount of time that it takes you to take that land and then keep moving, right? So early on, a strategy of island hopping is developed. And basically what island hopping is if we take a look here at the map, and we kind of use this as an example, let's just, we'll talk about Midway here in a second, which is kind of this one that's kind of floating out kind of in this area that you can see. For example, like if we were to take, these islands down here, why does the U.S. skip those? Well, it's because basically for the United States, like they are going to be very, very then strategic about which islands they're going to invade. They're going to, for example, like the Marshalls, they're going to invade those and take those, but then they're going to, kind of leave like the Carolinian Islands down here, the Carolines, like they're going to leave those alone. And the reason is because maybe they don't have as much, resource value for the United States. Maybe they're not even large enough in some cases to actually hold a runway for planes, right? So like the thought is very There's just a lot of thought that is put into this strategy. And so you kind of develop this idea of island hopping, where the islands that you leave behind that Japan had soldiers on, the United States basically says they don't matter. And they kind of then are cut off from getting, reinforcements. And if you're cut off from getting reinforcements and supplies, then for the United States, it's not a danger, right? As long as they don't have like access to planes or, boats or things like that. And there actually are some really, really sad stories that happen after World War II. Usually they're in like the years kind of after, but in some cases they're like 20 and 30 years later, where like Japanese World War II vets have been marooned on these islands for like literally decades. And they're actually like discovered by people, for, again, like the first time in many, many years. And like, it's just a very, very, kind of sad kind of outcome, unfortunate kind of sad kind of side outcome of this particular strategy. It is kind of in a way kind of comparable to Blitzkrieg, and kind of in terms of its kind of strategic thinking here, okay, this strategy of island hopping. So enough about that. So if you kind of understand the big picture, let's talk about Midway. So Midway is one of these U.S. islands that is out here. You can kind of see it northwest of Hawaii. Now, Midway is significant for a bunch of reasons. One is that it is large enough to have an airstrip on it. And second is that if the Japanese were to take Midway, that would put it within striking distance of, multiple assaults on Hawaii. And so the United States decides that Midway is one of these islands that it is going to play defense on, and it's going to try to actually hold on to it. And so the Battle of Midway is interesting because there's a bunch of deception that goes on to the U.S. actually figuring out where Japan is going to strike after Pearl Harbor. And so like one of the ways that the United States did this is that they hadn't broken yet every part of the Japanese naval code. So what they would do is, they kind of had a few different targets they thought the Japanese would go after Pearl Harbor. And so to test and figure out which one that the Japanese might be interested in, they started again, monitoring Japanese radio communications in the Pacific. And so they had one day a test on purpose sent out that said that Midway's desalinator plant was out. So desalinator is what turns your salt water into regular drinking water. And they kept seeing as soon as this message went out that AF's water desalinator is out. And they had no idea what AF meant, but they now knew from putting out this fake message that its water desalinator was out, something so specific that you would know what it's referring to, that they knew that AF was going to actually be, because of other messages that had come along, that said that AF was the target. So basically, the United States has the heads up on Japan, and again, the Japanese don't initially know that the U.S. and its remaining carriers that were still left over after Pearl Harbor are kind of lurking around. And there's a lot of YouTube videos you can go out and search on this that kind of shows you how Midway breaks down. What I would tell you is significant to know about it is that Midway is, and actually the Coral Sea is one that happens before this that is exactly the same way, but here it's very much, you can see that this is how the rest of World War II is going to go, is that the entire battle is planes versus other aircraft carriers. And so aircraft carriers are really going to be the powerhouse of World War II Pacific fighting. Now, again, because of the particular outcomes that happen in this battle, again, there's lots of YouTube videos out there. You can look at it. The outcome of this battle, how it ends up is that the U.S. destroys 4 of Japan's carriers while only losing 1. Okay, and again, aircraft carriers are super expensive. There's obviously all the pilots and all the training that goes into those, all the planes that go along with losing those. And most historians look at this and kind of consider it to be kind of one of the more significant turning points of the war against Japan. The other thing that in terms of battles that I would kind of point you to is another battle that happens on Guadalcanal, and it's an early example of the U.S. doing island hopping. If you're wondering where Guadalcanal is, okay, so if you look down here, okay, down towards kind of this area, kind of in the southern, I'm going to call it near Australia Pacific. So down here, kind of in this area, okay, is Guadalcanal. And Guadalcanal, it's a very tiny island, relatively speaking, to something like Hawaii or something like that. And it's a good early example of island hopping, and you really do there once Guadalcanal begins, you really do see that the Japanese, in terms of how they're going to try to hold on to territory, is usually to the death. Very, very few Japanese surrenders in really all of World War II by individual commanders. It just doesn't happen in the same way that, for example, it will, like when you look at the European theaters or back in like World War One. Surrendering for the Japanese in terms of the war code that a lot of their commanders follow is just simply not an option. You're just going to see some very, very bloody fighting that happens there. A lot of it ends up being, I wouldn't say like hand-to-hand, but it's certainly close quarters kind of combat. This is where like weapons like the flamethrower are going to get their like first use because of, a lot of the bunkers and other constructions and tunnels that happen on Guadalcanal. It's just a very, very brutal, rough kind of fighting. So here's Guadalcanal right down here. You can see it's part of the Solomon Islands chain. And again, you can kind of see like this big red line showing like really how much territory the Japanese have taken since the attack on Pearl Harbor. They really had pushed that line quite far into the Pacific. So kind of how World War II then wraps up in the Pacific is as the United States is successfully island hopping its way all the way to Japan. At this point, FDR has died after successfully getting elected to his fourth term in office. Then President Truman basically is told of this weapon that the United States has, and right as he's told that the U.S. has this new weapon, it's untested, but it's super powerful. The United States is then kind of ready to consider, well, okay, how are we going to wrap Japan? Like, how are we going to wrap this entire thing up? Now, there were plans to invade the Japanese home islands. It was codenamed Operation Olympic. That never actually did happen because when Truman sits down and he looks at the calculation that his military commanders presented him at the time, they basically said it would be roughly somewhere around 1 million U.S. casualties. Meaning that they think the Japanese are absolutely not going to surrender until it is, everything is, there's no clear chance of them surviving. Truman looks at this and, says for him, taking 1 million American casualties is simply not an option. And he decides then to drop this new untested weapon on Japan. So the first target is one over Hiroshima. So when the Fat Man atomic bomb is dropped, as it's codenamed, it just automatically vaporizes tens of thousands of civilians. The Japanese, obviously, very stunned. This brand new weapon. The U.S. drops leaflets letting them know that this will continue unless they surrender. When that does not happen, Truman drops a second one on the city of Nagasaki that was even stronger. And then Japan, after that, basically the U.S. says, this will not stop until you surrender, and that is when Japan sues for peace. Now, I will say, all things considered, the dropping of the atomic bombs, this choice to do that is by far one of the most profound, controversial decisions ever made in the history of humanity ever. It is the only time that nuclear weapons have been used for aggressive purposes as of 2024. And it is just, again, the idea that we're going to, vaporize civilians today, right? That is, again, killing civilians is just unequivocally, Geneva Convention war crime. So again, it is just this massive decision that is made in terms of its ramification for how world power is going to work afterwards. Either one, answer this question on Pear Deck, explain the strategy behind the idea of island hopping, or explain why Midway was a turning point for the war in the Pacific. Once you do that, you are going to wrap up the class by taking some time to vote on the opinion, did the U.S. make the right choice on dropping the bombs? And to help us explain this a little bit more deeply, I have 5 resources here for you. So the first is an article that was written from the pro point of view, like the U.S. made the correct choice, and the anti-view is the U.S. made the wrong choice. Please read both. The third is something that you need to definitely read, which is the perspective of the people on the ground. And that is something that a lot of folks leave out, is they don't take a look at the impact of how this, changed individuals' lives, right? The fourth thing is looking at, just to give you a understanding of how powerful this weapon was, is something here that shows you if you were to drop the same bomb on Indianapolis, which is where we're from, what the casualties would look like from that. So you can get a little bit of a better understanding of it. And then the 360 video is also something that helps you understand what the experience, kind of looked like from the ground, from, again, using some more modern technology to help us understand. So once you do that, you go on to the next slide, okay? You can vote on, did the U.S. make the right call to drop nuclear bombs on Japan, okay? And then right here, on the very last slide, slide 15, I want you to actually explain your decision behind your vote. So why was dropping the bombs the right or the wrong call? Okay? So once you do that, you've made it all the way through our lesson, and I will see you guys for the next one. All right, bye-bye.